Okay, right, so the bells have struck. It is now 12:15. Welcome to the Employment Committee. Today is Tuesday, the 27th of February 2018, and we are here in the Portsmouth Guildhall. For those of us watching online, hello, thank you, and welcome. No fire alarm test due today, and obviously the safe way to leave the building is via the steps at that end of the building if it does go off. Okay, in terms of item 1, apologies for absence, I have apologies from Councillor Jane Fleming and also from David Williams, Chief Executive. Anyone else, Vicky? And we've got Councillor Simon Bosher here deputising for Councillor Jim Fleming. No, not for the Chief Executive. Okay, so moving on to item 2, declarations of members' interests. Does anybody have any declaration to make? Okay, excellent, thank you very much. Item 3, minutes of the meeting held on the 12th of September and also minutes held on the 17th of October. The minutes have been circulated. I wonder if colleagues had a chance to have a look through them, if you've got any questions or comments. Okay, so we'll take those as agreed and I'll sign a copy at the end of the meeting. Okay, thank you very much. Right, moving on to item 4, the apprenticeship levy. And we've got John Bell here today to introduce the report.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. And also with me is Roland Bryant, who is my lead officer on matters around apprenticeships and is going to say a few words after I've given a very, very brief introduction. I think it's, I'll leave it for Roland to pick up the finer points. I think it is worth just stressing apprenticeships, I think, are a real success story for the Council at the moment. We are ahead of the pack, both in terms of other local authorities and in fact other public sector providers as well, both in terms of our numbers of apprentices, but also in terms of some of the sort of the infrastructure around it, which you'll pick up from the report. It's complex and quite a lot of heavy lifting, but I'm pleased to say that we have done most of that now, and I think are very well placed. So if I can hand over to Roland, who will talk you through some of the points within the report.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, we basically have made considerable progress, I think, with our apprenticeships now. We're looking at, when you combine in the pre-levy apprenticeships and the ones that we've actually recruited since the levy, that gives us a total of 119 in both the City Council and the maintained schools. Our target, which was dictated to us at the close of play at the end of March this year, is currently 146. So we're currently at 91. So we're moving towards hitting that target. And we do have some cohorts planned, particularly around leadership and management at level 3 and level 5, which will be coming up. We had quite a mention in a local government association document around our procurement practice in terms of setting up the DPS, which we were pretty much well ahead of the game, and we've included other local authorities and our NHS partnerships in those DPS to widen access to that. We've got a fairly comprehensive training directory, which is Appendix 1, and you'll see from there that there are a vast range of occupations now available in terms of apprenticeships, and that's growing all the time as new standards come on board. We're expecting the standards for the social work degree apprenticeship for social work to come in possibly January 19. Occupational therapy is another area that's being looked at, which will probably be a bit later, and the teaching ones are already in place. So I think it will definitely shift the way that we develop staff moving forward. I don't know if there's anything else that you wanted me to point out.
Thank you very much. I think it's very encouraging. There's a huge amount of work that's gone on, and as I say, I think having had the benefit of additional couple of briefings with John about this, the fact that we have led the way, particularly in our sub-region here, as a large employer that had that requirement as per the government direction to specifically have a certain percentage of the workforce as apprenticeships is encouraging. Also, it's worth noting, I think, the work that through our Armed Forces Covenant that we're doing, that's then meaning that we are, because apprentices apprentices can be any age, obviously. It doesn't have to be people that are 17, 18, 19. And actually people that have come out, veterans that have come out of the armed forces, that we are now guaranteeing them time as work experience in the organisation if they apply to us, and it's a job that we, we employ and we can accommodate. And it's much better than an interview because we actually get to know them, they get to know us, and we can see maybe they aren't quite right for the gardening service, but they'd be better for facilities management or security or something else. So actually I think it's working well, and hopefully in terms of upskilling the workforce, the apprenticeship levy could work quite well for some of those people too. Colleagues, comments or questions? Luke.
Firstly, a question. I think this is me just getting a bit confused by paragraph 5.7, where you're trying to tell us the number of apprentices that we currently have. Am I reading it that outside of schools we've got 91?
Yes, that's right, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, the other thing is on section 10, where it's just talking about the finances of it all. I mean, I assume those figures, that they've got to be beyond just the general fund. That must be, must be figures including, I don't know, HRA and schools for that amount of levy. I know, looking through some of the different apprentices available, that the longer term ones tend to be more expensive on a per monthly basis as well, because they're the higher level ones. Kind of makes sense, doesn't it? But equally, I mean, you can see we've got, well, again, some of this is coming from the schools budget, but from the amount from, I don't know, I mean, what's our, I think isn't our budget wage bill about 90 million outside of schools, so about 450,000 a year, something like that would be our levy amount, and we're not, even at making allowance for other apprenticeships coming in and some of the longer term ones being replaced by new ones inside the levy, it's presumably looking perhaps unlikely that we're going to spend the whole amount.
Yes, it's difficult to. John and I were having the conversation about how to present this information. What happens is we get a monthly drop of funds into our digital account. That's based on our payroll for that for the previous month. So you'll see that May 2017 was the first payment. What goes out on a monthly basis, we actually pay the training providers through the digital account on a monthly basis. So the cost of the apprenticeship is spread over the period of time that it's going to be undertaken. The endpoint assessment, if it's a standard, 20% of the cost is held back until the endpoint assessment is considered. So when you sort of build all this up together, what we've done is sort of try to calculate up how much we've spent, if you like, by bringing all those figures together. And for the starts in 2017, we have spent about 311,000, or committed 311,000. We've then, if you add in the starts in 2018, that adds another further 200,000, and then those in the pipeline would add another 100. So we're getting close to the approximated 760,000 that we were sort of given as a figure from finance at the beginning of the levy. So you will note in the paper there is going to be the option from April this year to actually transfer up to 10% of our levy to partner agencies. We haven't included that in this report because as yet we don't know all the detail about that, but we will need to come and bring that back to you at some point for you to discuss.
To make a question stroke comment on that as well, so recently there was a meeting, like an informal meeting really, with some organisations from the third sector. It's coffee and cake, which was now taking place on a monthly basis, and Kate Brady came along to talk to us on that. And one of the people present, this wasn't the council officer, it said this was someone from the sector, that one of the major employers in the city, I don't know which one, he didn't say, is just taking the position to treat this whole thing as a tax. And just to say, well, it's another 0.5% tax, and there it is, but we're not actually going to spend it. So, there is a bit of a question mark about whether, I don't know, almost whether the council could act as some form of broker, because if you're a small business, if you're, I don't know, you're a hairdresser and you're looking for an apprentice hairdresser, then you're not going to know to approach BAE Systems or some big company saying, can I have a slice of your levy?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fair point in terms of that sort of wider visibility. I mean, I think the view we would take as an employer is that we wouldn't want to be allocating proportions of it elsewhere if we felt we needed it here, but equally I'd much rather it was used, particularly, for example, for third sector organisations, rather than being lost altogether and just having to would effectively be a tax. Whether we can do more for external organisations, I mean, it's not something we've looked at so far, but I'm certainly happy to take that away and look into the feasibility of it.
I think my point really is, I mean, whether we use all of our levy or not, that there's going to be major employers in the city who won't, and therefore that becomes an opportunity for some way, at least around the margins, of upskilling the wider workforce.
If I can make a suggestion, I think that's a good point, and maybe it's something that we need to take away from here as to how we can maybe work, particularly with the largest employers, because I know that BAE, for example, have got over 65 apprentices now, but there will be, it's those SMEs that are caught at being over the level where they have to have them, but they're not quite big enough to have the structure. And I think that it would be useful to try and capture that detail, maybe through Mark Pemberton, who could maybe amass some of that information for you, our business regeneration manager. And one other thing is that I'd quite like to do, and I've started feeding this back through the LGA, maybe something Gerald could do as well, and that, you know, it's quite rigid what we can spend the money on. It's deeply frustrating because it has to be on upskilling. It has to be, as you know, on, you know, paying for someone to do an H&D, an H&C, a GMVQ or whatever it might be, some kind of business admin course. But actually, if we had greater flexibility from the government on how to spend that money, we could actually be employing far more people. We could actually be employing far more young people in the city now who maybe don't have the confidence to come forward, who, you know, we could be a lot more, if we could use it for their salary as well as for this upskilling them, you know, maybe if they did it as I see the government don't want us to just cost shunt our wage bill to this levy, which I appreciate. It's to upskill people, but there should be some degree of flexibility, whether it's 70-30, 60-40, or that if you're paying someone's salary, they must be undertaking a kind of known, recognised qualification at the same point. I think the rigidity of this is its biggest downfall at the moment, actually, and it's the exact point that Luke's just made as to why some people would just say, too much hassle, I'm going to have to employ a full-time coordinator just to manage the courses and the money and keep on top of the legislation around the apprenticeship levy. So I think that there's some learning points. It's like everything with government, you know, not their fault, but the idea is there. In practicality, when you're implementing it, things need to be tweaked. Right, I've got Gerald and then Darren.
Yeah, first of all, a useful, good report. Thank you very much indeed. Just a couple of questions, and actually I think Luke's suggestion is a good suggestion. Just thinking of nursing home where my mum was, that would have a turnover making it big enough to be paying the levy, and yet I doubt they'd know how to go about doing this. BAE is a big company and they've done apprenticeships forever, but actually looking around this city, there will be care providers and places like that who could really benefit from some support for us to be able to do that. My question is, it's the 146 target that we're meant to have. When are we meant to have that number in, first of all?
Yeah, that is an annual figure. That will be revised again at the end of March this year, so our headcount will change.
We're meant to have that in by the end of March.
Yes,
this year.
Yeah, we we are expecting that hardly anybody will meet their targets. That's what we've sort of heard, if you like, through the networks that we've been in. But we will need to report on that, and we will need to just justify if we don't reach that target as to why.
So at the moment we're on 119. Yes. Within a month and a day, we need to be at 146.
Yeah,
that's going to be hard work. But yeah. And just on a more general thing, my understanding is the numbers of people in apprenticeships has collapsed across the UK. Why has that happened when this scheme has been brought in? Mm-hmm. Now, it clearly doesn't affect us here at the City Council.
I think some of the information that we've got is that when when it was funded differently, employers really didn't have to contribute anything towards an apprenticeship. If they're a non-levy payer, they now have to contribute 10% of the cost of the apprenticeship, and I think that's what's put off some of the smaller employers from doing that.
No, that's interesting. Thank you.
Darren.
Thanks, Donna. I think one of the issues raised, Luke's point is right, but one of the issues you mentioned partner agencies. in your discussion, whereas paragraph 10.3 talks about levy-paying employers will be able to transfer up to 10% of their levy to any employers that employ apprentices, which implies that Luke's point can be dealt with anyway. So it would be useful to get a report on that. There's no need to reply that just yet. I think with Luke's second point, as far as the table we've got in 10.1 is concerned, it might be useful to help us going forwards if perhaps that was split up according to, say, General Fund HRA schools and then spent General Fund HRA schools. If it is impossible to do that, let us know, and we'll keep asking the questions. I'm getting nods here. This is great news. I'm assuming that we don't have to spend all the levy. Is that correct? I think so, because we're only spending about 10% of the levy amount at the moment.
Yeah, we basically have our first pot of money that went in May 27. We've got 24 months in effect to spend that. So when you add in February and then March's figures, we will have spent that amount. So it will only drop off month by month. So we've got a way of sort of looking at that in terms of actually trying to make sure that we don't sort of send any money back to government, basically.
That's helpful. I think if we, going forwards, it may be useful in future meetings just to have an estimate of where you think we're going in terms of the levy amount we've received. I realise this is going to increase the number of rows and columns in the table, but I'm sure Excel and Word will be okay with that one, just to make sure, so we get a full idea of the modelling going forwards. Yeah. So when it gets nearer the end, then we'll know what to do. Sorry, John.
Yeah, but if I could just be very clear to answer Councillor Sanders' question, it is definitely a use it or lose it basis. So we pay the money into the pot, we have to spend it to get it back. So, but we do have 2 years to do that. And I think just linking to the point that Councillor Jones made, the range of qualifications is increasing, and what we're very actively trying to do is move expenditure from, I suppose, more conventional courses of training, particularly in professional areas, accountants, surveyors, lawyers, etc., onto qualifications that are actually funded through the levy. So that's money the council would have spent on training anyway. We're trying to make sure that it's being spent on qualifications that qualify for the levy, because that's money we will lose if we don't actually divert that expenditure into that area.
That's fine, John. Sorry, Donna. That's fine, John. It's just at the moment we're in the process of losing 90% of it if we're not careful, which is something I don't think any of us wants. I just have two more questions, if I may, Donna. In 5.7, your indication is by the end of next month we will not achieve our 146 apprenticeship target. That's very helpful to know. What happens if we don't? Do we get punished?
We have to explain why, and as I say, the feedback that we're getting through the apprenticeship networks that we're in is that the expectation is that most organisations won't to hit that. So and we can evidence, if you like, how we've been proactive in terms of recruiting and getting people on board.
Interesting, a target without punishment. Magnificent.
Well,
more of those,
yeah.
please. My final question, Donna, if I may, is around 5.3 in the paper, which talks about the number of existing employees converting to an apprenticeship. How many of the 91 are existing employees? Are they then double counted as an apprenticeship in one division and an employee in another? And thirdly, how many are you expecting to have by the end of the apprenticeship levy period? And those are my questions, Dominic.
Okay. I haven't separated the figures out in there in terms of existing staff and because they are counted as one in the same. So an apprenticeship can be somebody that's already employed by us that we, as John said, if their traditional route to getting qualified for the work that they're doing would be for us to pay externally and a provider. We're now using the levy for those routes, so that's what we mean by converting. So the figures are actually counted as the same. So anything post April 2017 that we have put through the levy as an apprenticeship gets counted as one in the same.
Apologies. How many existing employees are also apprentices? That was sort of the question I was asking.
Yeah.
Explains the situation beautifully,
yeah.
but a number would be incredibly useful.
Yeah, I can
And
come
if
back
not
on.
now, then via email to all of us.
Yeah, I
if
can come
may.
back on that because I haven't put that in the report.
And I recall when I had a briefing about this about 3 or 4 months ago, when we had far less, we had 67, 69. They were new to the organisation. So I'm assuming the uptake is those that are within the organisation, therefore then doing training. But if you could clarify that maybe via email, that would be useful. And also the target, as you said, what happens? Well, nothing essentially, but essentially it's a guidance from the government of what they want us to do based on headcount, isn't it? It's an expectation, but it is encouraging that we are one of the highest achieving organisations I think in the sub-region actually from what we've seen. And in terms of I think Darren's made a good point about what John said about use it or lose it, and Darren was saying what happens if you don't spend it then. Actually, I would, if it was a graph, I would expect it to sort of go like that, because when the policy was announced, there was then a big void around the detail before the detail was then confirmed about how many. I mean, do you remember we were talking for ages about what can we spend the money on, and you were like, we don't know yet. We still haven't had the clarification. Next month, do we have any further detail yet? No, we still don't know because we're still waiting for the clarification. So once the policy announcement had been made and we knew it was starting for this financial year, the actual finer detail didn't come out until the 11th hour, which meant that we've lost part of this year, as have all employers, on building the programme around what you can actually spend the money on, and we're much further ahead than others. So if we can help the third sector and SMEs, as Luke and Gerald have said, that would be obviously very useful. But I would expect next year our attrition rate to getting the money out the door to be much, much better, because it will be an up and running scheme. Right, John.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, apologies for being slightly late, and I have no declaration of interest. Just, I was feeling ignored.
Sorry, not staffed, as you know.
Exactly. I had a question about drop-off rate. I'm not sure whether it's in any of the reports. I couldn't see it there. There's a lot of talk in the media about the quality or lack of quality of some of the apprenticeships being offered across the economy. So I just wonder what the drop-off rate is in terms of those that start apprenticeships with the council, and that may or may not be an indicator in terms of the quality of the apprenticeships that we're offering.
Yeah, the dropout rate has been pretty non-existent. We've had the odd one which has been based on health problems and somebody actually then piling out. But we've done a lot of work to make sure that managers are very aware what the commitment is, and I think that's the biggest thing with an apprenticeship. It's understanding what that commitment is, how that impacts operationally on delivery of services. And so we've done a lot of work in terms of really getting that known and out there. We've got an extremely robust procurement process that has enabled us to do many competitions that then we assess against a set specification. And we've only had 2 providers that we've actually began to start working with that we've then decommissioned. So it's not that the apprentices dropped out, but actually the provider wasn't giving us the quality that we'd asked for, so we actually decommissioned them and looked at another provider.
Colleagues, Luke.
Yeah, just in terms of this 140 whatever it was target, I mean 6. Just looking through the numbers, I mean, so we've got 2,500 staff in schools, and it would look to me on the face of it, although in the remaining part, so in the general fund, HRA and public health, the bits we actually have control over, if you scale back the target for that, and then you look at the 89 number, which is identified in Appendix 4, that we probably cover our bit. And my question is, what control do we have over the schools element? Because obviously we don't control who schools employ. That's a matter for them, even if they're maintained. Their element of the levy, how does that work? I mean, of course, you could cut both ways, couldn't it? I mean, you could imagine a hypothetical situation anyway, where a school goes completely crazy, employs hundreds of apprenticeships, and then sends the council the bill. So there has to be a limit on this, sort of in both directions.
It is certainly a moot point with regard to schools, and there was quite a lot of discussion about this when the levy first came up. I think there was one council that had been very strongly outsourcing its services, which effectively had virtually no one employed by the council, but thousands of people employed in schools, which of course gave them a massive levy target. So there are anomalies around that. I think all we can say is that the situation is anomalous. Those schools which are not converted to academies, the staff are our employees, and the way the calculation works, they do create us an apprenticeship target. And you're right, we can't force the schools to adopt apprentices. What we are doing, though, is working very closely with them, and we actually have a post which is funded through the education sort of finance arrangements and part funded by the schools, where the person basically goes out to the schools, provides them with expertise and guidance and encouragement about creating apprentices, and that's starting to be really successful, and we're getting quite a high take-up of apprentices in schools. So they are sort of doing their bit, and that was very much what we were keen to achieve.
In fact, I've surprised myself by actually remembering a figure. So on Appendix 4, this sheet here, actually does break it down in that we've got 114 we know across the whole organisation, including schools. We've got 89 that are in PCC departments, which would indicate that there are 25 that are in schools, therefore. And of those 89 that are in PCC departments, 69 of them have been recruited new to us, so meaning that there were 20 that have transferred over. I mean, you can clarify this, but this document's quite useful in Appendix 4 because 20, therefore, are existing employees that are now just being upskilled through the levy. Okay. Questions, comments, I think we're all done. So just the report is for noting, to thank the officers for the work they've done, to keep an eye on this, bring it back again, maybe next quarter, so that we can review, as Darren said, the various different breakdown of numbers, figures and what we're spending. I think the attrition of the spending is important. So thank you very much. Colleagues, everyone in agreement? Thank you. Right, moving on to item 5, the pay policy statement. And John is introducing this one too. On your favourite subject as well. It's such a shame to lose you.
I'm sure that Darren will be able to.
Anyone would think he's worried that he might be leader of the council in a couple of months' time and he might have to implement what he says. There we go.
That's why we could remain consistent.
Ah, I see. Okay. Right. Thank you very much, Gerald. See you later. John.
Okay, thank you. Members will be very familiar with the format of this because obviously it's something we've had to do for the last few years. Just a reminder that this is the retrospective statement, so effectively this is for the year that we're just coming to the end of. You've seen earlier in the year an earlier draft of this to sort of tell you what the pay policy was likely to look like over the year. So it has to be approved by full council by the 31st of March, so subject to member approval here. That's where it will go. I don't think there's anything I need to say to expand on it because I think I've done that on previous occasions, but obviously happy to take any questions that members may have on the detail of the statement.
Thank you very much. I mean, I think it seems fairly straightforward. Darren.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that clarification, John. Just to confirm, with regards to Section 2, which is the remuneration of the lowest paid employees, I'm assuming in this pay policy that the lowest paid employees did not get an increase above the £7.85 an hour, which is the Portsmouth City Council living wage in the 17-18 financial year. That is correct, is it not? 16, 17. No, this is 17-18, Lou. That's what I'm saying. This is the pay policy 17-18. So it is looking backwards.
Well, we're still in 18, 17, 18.
I realise that. We've got about 32 days to go. I'm assuming the answer to my question is yes.
Sorry, Councillor Sanders, you slightly lost me during the question. Could
That's
you
fine. I'm not happy.
could you just clarify exactly what you're asking me?
I'm making an assumption in Section 2, which is that in the remuneration of the lowest paid employees, that those employees within the Portsmouth City Council living wage, which is £7.85 an hour, did not get a pay rise above that level in the 17-18 financial year. This is a question to which I believe the answer is no. To help you, John.
I can assure you I don't need any assistance to that one, Councillor Sanders. As members will be aware, there was not an agreement to increase the Portsmouth City Council living wage in line with the living wage recommended by the Living Wage Foundation. As such, that level of living wage has effectively remained the same in accordance with previous agreements and discussions of this committee. It is worth saying that the number of employees in that bracket has obviously diminished year after year, as pay generally has increased at the lower end of the pay scale, and the stated policy of members, which was essentially to freeze the Portsmouth City Council living wage on the basis that the national living wage, which was increasing faster than inflation, would catch it up, which is indeed what has happened now.
I think that answers my question as no, which is fine, John, and thank you very much for that.
I thought this was looking ahead, not retrospective anymore. This is the one that we changed.
No, this one is retrospective. So effectively, you get one earlier in the year to say what the policy will be over the coming year. The statutory requirement is actually to agree it for the year just completed, which is what this statement's doing.
So what was it that we changed last year then, that I changed to say this is stupid that we're doing it at the end of the year and we should be doing it at the beginning to tell people what they're doing?
Yeah, essentially we've always done it at the end of the year because that's a statutory requirement. Your request was that we also bring it to members earlier in the year so you get sight of it and can shape it for the year ahead, which is what we've done. So you get a draft to say this is what it's going to be, and then I bring it back at this time of year to say this is what it actually was. It's a statutory requirement we have to fulfil, I'm afraid.
Yeah, statutory requirement, we have to have it approved within the year, but not that we have to do it. Yeah, this is ridiculous. There's no point in having this document. We've already had this at the beginning of the year. We've already approved our pay policy statement for 2017-18. I don't understand why we're doing it twice. This is just a duplication.
And I would actually support Donna in that, because we did ask for it to...
And we did do it. We did do it back in, I think it was September time.
I was a little bit surprised when you mentioned it was retrospective, John, as well.
And surely it's not, the government's not saying we have to do it at the end of the year. They're saying we have to do it in the 2017-18 year. This should not be coming back at this point again in the future, surely.
It's a time we've always bought it. I mean, I'm more than happy sort of not to do
that.
So, yeah.
You know, at the end of the day, we have to adopt as an employer a pay policy statement 2017-18, 18-19, 19-20. We don't have to do it twice in a year. We haven't changed it, and that's why doing it retrospectively is stupid, because we should be saying to our staff, this is our pay policy statement for the year ahead. So this is a rehash of September's document, which shouldn't come back, and I should have picked that up when we went through our briefing.
Yeah,
So
we'll
we'll
sort that
change
out
that
for next
the
time.
future.
Yep.
Right, okay. Colleagues, everyone happy with the report, which came in September and is back again now in February, but hopefully we'll have one again in the next meeting at the start of the new financial year for staff. Everyone happy with that? Yep. Thank you very much. Right, okay, so move on to item 6, which is the sickness absence quarterly report. John again.
Okay, yes, and apologies for hogging the floor. I mean, this is another one, of course, which members will be well familiar with, having seen at previous meetings. As you'll see from the figures, we have a very slight reduction in sickness absence over the period, which is obviously to be welcomed. But as always, my message is obviously we're continuing to work to get that as low as possible. That actually stems from a small absence in short-term. Small reduction in short-term absence. There is some explanation in the report regarding some changing of directorate boundaries, which obviously will have, which is necessary in order to understand the figures a little bit. The other thing which I would just stress is that there was a decision regarding spending some money from a public health transformation fund to create a resource to promote employee well-being, which is obviously linked very much to reducing sickness absence, and the particular focus with that bid was to provide a resource that would be able to support those areas of the workforce that are not based in the civic offices, because actually that's where our areas of absence are highest, and where it was felt that some well-being support for the staff and the managers there would be most useful. So that post has now been recruited, and obviously I will report back to members at future meetings the impact that that's making and the work that's being carried out. I don't think I need to add any more, but obviously happy to take any questions that members may have.
Colleagues, Darren?
Two directorates stand out, not so much because of the numbers, but because of the percentage working time lost. One is adult services, and one more surprisingly is public health. They're both at well over 6% of the total working time lost, which flashes lights to me. I'm not proposing that they come and have naughty boy nets in this particular committee next time, but it'd be useful to know whether that's been picked up by colleagues now and what steps are in place to try and reduce that, if any.
Okay. I mean, adult social care, I mean, you're right, obviously it does have high levels of absence. I think it is also worth saying, though, that they have come down quite a lot, actually, over recent periods, as I've flagged up in the report. I think it was over 15 days at one point, so it's now down to 12. So good progress is being made. I mean, it is traditionally an area that's always experienced quite high levels of absence, and I think there are some factors that do affect that. You've obviously got a lot of staff who are dealing with a lot of people who are unwell, for example, so inherent there are some drivers for it. It's still higher than we want it to be, I can't argue with that, and certainly a lot of those are staff who are outside of the civic, and that's the sort of areas that we want our new wellbeing worker to be supporting. Public health, I think, it's a relatively small group of staff. There's been a lot of organisational change going on in that area, and there have been some cases of individuals who had quite long periods of absence who have now or will soon be leaving the organisation. Statistically, because it's a rolling years data, if you've got someone who has now left but had quite long periods of absence, effectively their stats stay in the figure sort of until they drop out after a year, if you like. So I think we will see over time that figure for public health starting to come down as well.
A couple of comments, and yeah, just to build on that really. So that's right. I mean, the public health staff complement is down by more than a third, which is mostly to do with restructure in the wellbeing team. It's fair to say that there was a bit of such a scale of reduction created some morale problems, so forth, and I would expect those numbers to work their way down considerably. As John says, when that drops out over the year. In adult services, it's also worth remembering about half of the workforce are in care homes. If you're in a care home, then there are extra rules that apply to you. So if you've got any symptoms of any sort of infectious disease and so on, just an old cough, well, if it's in here, you'd probably come in anyway. If you're working in a care home, you're explicitly not allowed to. So you're always going to get a higher level of absenteeism in a care home, because we've necessarily got restrictions on when you're allowed to come in and work. But I do take the point, it's still higher than it ought to be, but it is at least moving the right way.
Thank you. I mean, yeah, overall, I think it's a positive report. It's going in the, well, it's not positive, but it's going in the right direction. I mean, like John says, to see adult social care come down by a recognised amount, I think is certainly good. Children's social care, on the other hand, I mean, that could be reflective of stress levels, case management levels. Again, we've now got one of the highest number of looked after children I think the authorities had in a decade, around 400 children, of which almost a quarter are unaccompanied asylum children. So they're not actually our own. If we took that number away, actually our trend of our own Indigenous child population is actually going down well because of the interventions we're putting in place with the Family Intervention Project. The executive, again, halved. That's great. So that's really, really good news. Public health, though, I agree with Darren. I think it's certainly something we need to look at. And, there's reasons, obviously, Luke's given an explanation to, which is fair enough. Yeah. Right, colleagues, anyone else got any comments or questions? Right, so the report is for noting. Again, that will come back as it does regularly on that one. And that is the end of the meeting. Thank you very much for attending.